Hello, and welcome to Our World Today, a progressive political show imagining a better tomorrow. I'm your host, Karen Schraufnagel, and tonight's show is Islamophobia, an attack on Muslim communities, and I'm joined by Jaylani Hussein, the Executive Director of CAIR Minnesota, and Imam Hassan Mohamud, Dr. Imam. So I'm here with two experts on this field, and I thought that we should probably start just with what is Islamophobia, and then talk a little bit about Islam and Somalia and some background, and then maybe the specific attack on the Somali community that is the Countering Violent Extremism program, if we have enough time. So who wants to start by telling me what Islamophobia is?
I can start, Karen. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Having us with, it's an important topic to talk about today, but I think it starts off with what is this term and what does it actually mean? Islamophobia is irrational thought of fear. It is really stemmed out of racism, bigotry, and all wrapped up in this idea of religious intolerance, that Muslims are, and those who practice the faith of Islam, Muslims, are somewhat a threat and should be feared. And while Islamophobia and the type of fear is not new, in the past few years, we have seen an increase of groups who have spread lies about Islam and Muslims to create this anxiety and to create this fear to be manifested to a level where we're starting to see hate crimes across the United States and even here in Minnesota. CAIR Minnesota, which I'm the executive director of, we have actually been monitoring, our national office has been monitoring Islamophobia, and we actually have the website called Islamophobia.org that has tons of information about who's been really pushing this effort. We know in the United States, studies have found that nearly 75% of Americans have little or no understanding of Islam. Yet today's worldly news is dominated with coverage about Muslims in the world. And so a lot of individuals are forced to make an opinion with really no knowledge. Filling this void now is a group of active organizations across the United States and here in Minnesota who are using Islamophobes, self-made experts who are really benefiting from this lack of ignorance, or this ignorance, lack of information, benefiting from that and providing misinformation. And so today we're starting to see in Minnesota Muslim men and women come under not just fear but also hatred to the level where Muslims are being assaulted. There was a woman in an Applebee's with her family who was assaulted for speaking a different language, for being a Muslim and living in Minnesota. We've never thought that in Minnesota we would see such a thing. We have seen a Muslim couple in their literally senior citizens held at gunpoint in Brooklyn Park. And these are two incidents that really highlight the general fear. But at CAIR Minnesota, we have been monitoring this in Minnesota. We've noticed an increase of bullying of Muslim kids. We have noticed an increase of harassment and hate crimes across Minnesota, really targeting, again, Muslims and based on this fear. So Islamophobia is something that I think is relevant right now, and it's definitely a concern not only for Muslims, but for other people who recognize the discrimination and the bigotry and the racism that this issue has become.
So if Islamophobia is an irrational fear of Islam, like agoraphobia is an irrational fear of open spaces, so I want to turn to you, Imam, to tell us a little bit about Islam, because for people who don't know, an imam is a religious leader, like a rabbi or a priest, and so you're an expert on Islam.
Yes.
Is Islam something to be feared by the rest of us?
Not definitely. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I will start in the name of God, most merciful, most beneficent. And we always say when we greet, Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be upon you. So that
Sounds
itself shows,
peaceful.
yes, that itself shows like what is Islam about. And the term Islam came from salam, which means peace itself. So, and there is a name of God. God has, as we believe, 99 names. One of the names of the God is As-Salam, which means peace again. And then there's a specific supplication that always Muslims read, and we say like, Allah anta salam, means you are the peace, and the peace comes from you, and that peace showers us to enjoy among ourselves. So, and then there is also saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was defining who's the Muslim. Al-Muslim man salim al-Muslimun min lisanihi wa yadihi. The person who's a Muslim is the one that always gives safe or become a safe neighbor, if you want to call that, or spread peace. So you want to expect a Muslim person to do all acts of the violence against innocent people. So this is all about that. We, from this beginning that I said until now, we're talking about peaceful religion. And people who are the followers of Islam, their name is Muslims, means like peace officers by nature. So this is the problem that I always say. I say that whether they do intentionally or not, the Islam, the word Islam is different. The Muslim.
Okay.
The Muslim is the follower of Islam.
Okay.
And the follower of Islam is following peace, religion, to become peaceful person and to spread peace. And Islam itself is a religion. So when you hear like the candidate is saying, especially Cruz and Trump, whenever they say that Islam, radical Islam, extremist Islam, or extreme Islam, it's not true. So that's why I was wondering who is advising them, because I'm sure they have advisors, and I'm sure those advisors are well educated if it is true. But giving like those candidates those type of advice that to align or attach Islam with terrorism or with extremism is conflicting what is Islam about. So individual Muslims could do like a violent act, and that becomes like individual action, isolated or whatever is the reason behind. But Islam as a religion, you can never attach, because by nature Islam means peace. So the follower of Islam is follower of peace. So as my friend said, you see when you read all this, the meaning of Islam and the follower of the Islam or practitioners of the Islam, they are peace officers. When you see all this, that shows there could be like agenda to paint Islam as a religion of violence. So you are talking about 2 billion people,
Right.
more than 1 billion people practicing in the world. If you see like a few individuals acting against Islam, that does not show that all Islam as a religion or all Muslims as a Muslims are those type of the people.
And so to say that everyone must always condemn these individuals as like
We-
the
yes.
but they're, again, when they say condemn Islamic extremism, they're putting, or violence, they're conflating two things that don't belong
Belong to
together
each other.
ever.
Yes,
Right.
yes. And then the other thing, Allah says, chapter 2, verse 143, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We made you a society who are balanced society, fair society. Wasata means mu'tadil, means society, moderate society. Who made that? God. Who are those people? Muslims. So how you can change those type of the society that by faith they are moderate society by nature to what they are not. So that's the problem that's going today. If those other side or those have like Islamophobia mentality, hate of Islam, if they do study well and fairly and objectively about the Islam and the history of Islam from Prophet Muhammad time and until like the end of Khilafah, Islamic State, 1924, they will find like Islam even like the history of Islamic State, Jewish community, they talked about that was the best time that they ever had, comparing the time of the Hitler or any other time in the history of mankind when they lived under the Islamic State. And but they saw this Islamic State and what they do, and they wanna use this as a right standard, which is not true. So what the non-Muslim is supposed to do at this time is, whenever they hear this type of Islamophobia, to go back history of Prophet Muhammad and see the beauty of Islam in terms of the mercy religion. One of the verses of the Quran, God said, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, which means you are indeed mercy to world. So it's not to specific Arab or black people, the whole world. And then the Prophet mentioned that a woman that was a prostitute that's supposed to go to hellfire because of the act of the behaviors, God forgave her because of the one act that she did. And that act was promoted by Prophet Muhammad. That act was to feed or to give drink or water to a dog that was dying because of the thirst.
Wow.
So she helped, and God forgave all her sin, and the Prophet used as a best example how Muslims care about the animals, not only the human beings. And there is another occasion that the Prophet Muhammad talked about woman that kept a cat in her room. She never released, and she never fed. And the Prophet said that that woman will go to hellfire because of the act against that animal.
To animals.
So yes, so this is the Islam that we are talking, not the Islam that they're talking. Islam that takes care the animals. Islam that's mercy. Islam that
mercy
is tolerant,
to everyone.
yes, to everyone. Islam that brings people together. You come to the state, Islamic State at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, you will see the constitution of Prophet Muhammad made that Christian of Najran, Jewish that living there, all of them, the Prophet, he said, like, you're all the same. You're all one, and you're all the same. You have the same responsibility, you have the same rights. That time we had that type of the constitution made under Islam. So people, but the problem is there's a lot of misconception, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and there is a lot of misread about Islam.
And some of it, you know, could be deliberate, and some of it is just ignorance. I want to ask you, Jaylani, because you guys monitor some of the consequences of Islamophobia. You get called when there's hate, violence, and just bullying in the schools. So, and you also talked about the Islamophobe being represented as actual experts on Islam. So, tell me a little more about this. And I also understand that it's a big problem outside of the Twin Cities, where Muslims are often in communities, but they're isolated. So, yeah, maybe you could talk a little more.
CAIR has, CAIR National, our national office did a study, or presented a study that was well documented a few years ago, actually in 2009. And in that study, we found out there was 69 organizations nationally that were actually working on dispelling misinformation about Islam and Muslims. 37 of these organizations were that was their main mission, that was their main work. And we're seeing this group become even much more stronger in that work. During that time, we actually realized that they actually get funded over $119 million. This number is obviously outdated. There's much more money now that's out there. So there is a group of people across even Minnesota, in central Minnesota and other places, who've actually picked up on these groups, these national groups that have local affiliate organizations. And they do bring speakers, who, you know, these self-made experts, and they come to communities, and they've been traveling in northern Minnesota and southern Minnesota, speaking to large crowds, and pretty much saying things that you would hear from a clear extremist into a certain extent, saying that Muslims are here to kill you, they're here to eat your children. I mean, literal things that would shock the conscience. But because, again, of this ignorance, and of course of this irrational fear, and on top of that, religious intolerance at the heart of it. All of these culminations have created really a huge issue in northern Minnesota. I know in Bemidji, Minnesota, that there was some concerns for the students who attend the university there. And we found out that actually Islamophobia doesn't just affect Muslims, it affects all people who look like it. So Islamophobia to a certain extent is actually racialized. So it was actually international students who were coming under a great deal of harassment in this region. And so right now, one of the most important things, I think, or one of the things we've learned about Islamophobia is that one, and this goes back to the conversation of Islam being looked at a monolithic, one view, that there's one Muslim out there. And therefore the community is all one, and we all look alike and we all do the same thing, which is wrong. Muslims are 1/5 of the world's population. They're the second largest religion in the world. 1.7 billion people practice Islam. Here in the United States, Islam is the second religion after Christianity. Muslims have been here in the United States since the inception of our nation. The first Muslim so-called president, or the one accused of being a Muslim, was Thomas Jefferson. The first Ramadan dinners were held at the White House long during the time of Jefferson, and 1/3 of all African Americans are believed to be Muslim. And when they came over, obviously their religion came under fire. And even today, here in Minnesota, in the Midwest, we have the oldest and most documented Muslims in the United States here, living in Iowa, living in North Dakota, living in Minnesota, that date back to the 1900s. There's a mosque from 1925 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. There's another mosque in 1925 as well in North Dakota, in the middle of nowhere, in Ross, North Dakota, in Minot. Muslims have been here longer than the East African immigration, East African immigrants of Somalis who just recently came, which I'm part of in just in the early 90s. So Islamophobia is trying to erase the history of American Muslims and the overwhelming history of Muslims being here, being part of this nation, being part of the success of also this nation. I always joke with people who sometimes have a hard time listening to this. Because there's a lot of people who are like, no, this is not true. Muslims haven't been here. Muslims are trying to take over the world. Muslims have been here, part of this nation. They're serving in the army, as President Obama mentioned, and others have. But there's one story that I always tell, which is so unique to America, which actually crosses a conversation we're having today about Syrian Americans. The ice cream cone was invented by an immigrant from Syria. In a 1912 fair. And so the ice cream cone is a Muslim, Syrian, American invention.
Really?
And so if you go to Dairy Queen in the summer and you want to have an ice cream cone, you're having a Muslim, American invention with a Syrian background. All those combinations. So the reality that we want to omit history is part of the problem with Islamophobia. And as the Imam discussed, as Muslims, we are unfortunately, especially in today's global terrorism, Muslims are the most number of people, most people killed under these terrorist organizations.
Yes, I want to get to that. So we called the show Islamophobia, an attack on Muslim communities, plural, because we want to start to disentangle that. People see it as a monolith. So who are the Muslims in Minnesota? We have a very large Somali population here, the largest in the United States, I believe.
Correct.
But it's not just people from Somalia, and a lot of the younger Somali Americans are not actually from Somalia. If we're talking about an immigration that was in 1993. So maybe talk a little about what happened in Somalia, because I think with all fear and hatred of immigrants, there's also often a failure to understand what U.S. policies were happening, that immigrants, just like all of us, don't particularly want to leave their home and move to frigid Minnesota. So I think we'd back up and do a little context here.
Let me jump on that quickly. So if you go back to history of Somalia, Somalis, they believe something called like Somali Way, the Great Somalia.
Okay.
It was one time that about 1884, the colonial system divided the Somalia 5 parts. If you see the Somali flag, the blue flag, it has 5 stars.
Okay.
Like each means like one province that was took off from the whole Somalia. So it has been divided 5. So one was under the Italian colonial system, and the other one was the British, number 2, and the other one was French, and then the other one under Kenya, and the other one under Ethiopia.
Wow. Okay.
So this is like a beautiful Somalia that existed before the colonial system.
Sounds
so they were
a lot
one,
like the Middle East.
yes, they were
or
one.
all of Africa.
So they were one, and they had like one religion, all of them. They had one language, and also one culture. So it is, you can call like homogeneous one society or nation. So that has been divided.
Did it encompass part of what's now Ethiopia and Kenya as well, or was it still the same boundary area? Do you know what I'm saying? When it was divided up, when it was one before it started to be split up, was it still occupying the same general place on the map? We'll show a map. So.
Oh, okay, so but yeah, the map looks like 7,
Yeah.
which is like the missing 3 parties
Okay.
that time, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but so after 1960, after Somali independence, 2 came together. The Italian part that Italian colonized and the part that the British colonized, they came together and united July 1st, 1960.
Okay.
And they formed Somalia.
What we now know as Somalia.
Somalia, yes. And then after that, so to make it very short, from 1960 to 1969, we had a democratic type of the government, although there was corruptionist, but it was like something beginner, and it was good for the Somalis because they had that time a government that takes care of all the Somali issues. But 1969, we have a revolution against that democratic system, and that revolution was military coup by Mohammed former Somali president, and he had type of the new ideology of communism. So that communism, or what they call sometimes anti-Wadac socialism, was conflicting about, number 1, the culture of Somalia, and then religion of Islam. And then here we started like a struggle, the Somali people, until 1991, January, that Siad Barre was gone, but here we had a civil war. So they never formed after that time a type of comprehensive government that Somalis agree. Until 2000, they had like type of there was, before that there was reconciliations going on. But until 2000, they formed after that the first type of the interim government based on the tribal system. All the way 2012, Somalia had the first permanent government, so which ends its term August 2016, soon.
Yes.
So since 1991, we have like a huge refugee fled from Somalia to everywhere almost. So since
Because of the
1991, because
civil
of civil
war,
war, yes.
right.
Since 1991, and then you hear like Somalis almost were everywhere, even all the way to China. So they say like if you find a black person speaks any language in the world, guess that person is Somali, because they went everywhere to save their lives. So Somalis, when they came here, they came for their safety. They never came like to harm anybody. They came to get a freedom, to get like where they can practice their faith and their religion, and to get also bring them together if they can help back their family, the one that they left behind. And we have a type of the culture from Somali culture and from the Islam, which means you cannot ignore about the suffering of member of your relatives. That's why they survived when they, whoever left behind, whether they were in the refugee camps or in back home in Somalia. So that's the nutshell. But what's important also to know is 2006, about June, so Islamic courts were formed. Islamic courts means like group of the Islamist and moderate group. They came together because before that time, 2006, we had a problem because the society run by warlords, raping, killing the people, confiscating like the properties rights of the others. So then the scholars and the imams came together and they formed Islamic courts. Islamic courts means like courts that can bring justice and hope. It was very successful. From June 2006 until December, almost 70% of Somalia like became peaceful. They are trying to get back like what is about Somalia, and then that is the best time in the history that you can remember. All Somalis united under the Islamic courts. But here is the problem, that Islamophobia that was talking Jaylani. Ethiopians, for some reason, they had a fear about if Somalia comes back, because there's a history that they skipped. 1977, there was a war between Ethiopia and Somalia, and that war was the Somali government, as I said, like there was a conflict of the borders between Ethiopia and Kenya, because there are two missing portions of Somalia. So Ethiopia never conceded that Somalia, that land belonged to Somalia. So the Somali government that time, the military government, made a decision to take their land back. So 1977, there was a war. Almost that war, Somalia seized its land. So, but there was interference by the superpower, especially the Russians, with its allies, that pushed the Somali military back. And then we have, after that, in 1991, that the Siad Barre, the Somali government, was kicked off by the rise of the people. Then we had a civil war. Then we have 2006 Islamic courts that trying to unite. So here, Ethiopian government had a fear that if Somalia comes back, they will claim again their land.
Right.
So for that reason, to weaken, what they did is they painted the Islamic courts as a terrorist groups. And they sold this to America. And American government, what they did is they helped. Before they were not like admitting that they helped or they supported. But State Department later on, the officials, they admitted that they supported Ethiopian government based information given to United States. That these Islamic courts, instead of United States helping Somalia, because they know that we run away from all the civil war, we are looking for like peaceful type of the government. And this government brought all types of the Somalis together in one place, united Somalis with hope, peace, and justice, the first time. That was crushed by Ethiopian forces. And here you have the birth of Al-Shabaab. So from there. So, and then that's why some scholars, they say like Western Ethiopia created violent groups in Somalia because of the reaction of what has happened. Ethiopian forces came in, about 20,000. They invaded Somalia, and many Somalis, and that's why some youth left here. They were nationalists, they were not terrorists. But the way that was painted was they were terrorists. So that's where people, we need them to know like the whole history about and what's going on in Somalia. Nobody or no Somalia ever intended, as far as I know, to harm outside of the Somalia innocent people or civilian people, whether it's American people or non-American people.
So sadly, I think the things that people here know about Somalia, they got from Black Hawk Down, the movie, and the pirates. That made it into popular culture.
Captain
Somali pirates. So since we're addressing myths, can you talk about the message of Black Hawk Down and who these pirates were?
Well, I think we have to recognize that Hollywood has an ugly history of portraying blacks, African Americans, anybody of color in the most worst light possible.
And
I mean, today
we name our war machines after native tribes,
absolutely,
which is
absolutely,
disgusting.
absolutely.
Yes.
And,
so Black Hawk, I'm talking about the helicopter.
and we entertain ourselves with that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm against the Redskins,
Yeah,
for example.
the sports teams. It's all.
So I think it's an important thing to recognize that this community, Somalia, and I just would add a little history beyond what the Imam mentioned. Somalia has caves of drawings that in northern part of Somalia that date back to 9,000 BC. Somalia has a rich history
original people
of
from
interaction
this area.
between
Yeah.
Africa and Asia, dating back because of its being on the coast. Historically, China and Asia, when they sailed, the winds would typically take them to Somalia. So Somalis have been interacting with the East longer than anyone, even Europe. Before the Silk Road, Somalia was interacting with these. So if you look at even the Somali food and the dress and the clothes, it's a combination of Africa and the Asian cultures. We have images that date back to China where Somali giraffes were traded through trade, and they were sent to China. And so Somalia has a very long history, and entrepreneurship is a huge part. And today, if you go in Minneapolis, you'll find 500 stores of Somalis in a couple of Somali malls, and I encourage Minnesotans to go out and actually go and see some of these malls. You will almost feel like you've stepped into a part of Somalia. So Somalis are very proud people as well, and historically have been very outspoken, and that's kind of the nature that they are, and that also is actually good in Minnesota to help bridge the gap. I know in St. Cloud, a woman was verbally assaulted, and the person who verbally assaulted assumed that she doesn't speak English.
Right.
And so she responded and confronted her and challenged her. And so we really need to have a conversation and dialogue. America is a nation of immigrants. Unless you're a Native American,
Right.
you did not come here.
You're not from here.
You're not technically, you're not technically from here. Your ancestors are from somewhere else. You are somewhat of an immigrant,
Right.
and it's difficult sometimes for people to assume that the new immigration is any different than the previous
Right.
immigrants. There are challenges. There's disparities. There's a lot of issues that definitely the new immigrants are facing. Many lessons that the communities have learned from the Hmong, who were actually the first real introduction of immigrants to Minnesota, and they've actually paved the way a lot for many of the other immigrant communities that are living here. You mentioned earlier about the Muslims in Minnesota. Muslims in Minnesota are not, they come from all places of the world. They also come from here,
right.
as well.
Yeah.
And this, as you mentioned, nearly 30% of the Somali population now is American-born, American-born and raised. And so it's important to recognize that. And I think, stepping back to the question you've asked, why are we here? Why now? Why is it such a big deal? Why is Islamophobia? Why are Muslims coming under attack? And I think it's a combination of a couple of things. I think a combination of the fact that there is ignorance about this faith. There is racism in America that is still alive and well, whether it's institutional racism or blatant racism. And every time we look back at our history, we just 50 years ago, nearly 50 years ago, we had fountains that said black and white in this country. That's not a lot. I mean, that means people, a large percent of this population witnessed that, let alone participated in it.
Exactly.
So we have a way to go when it comes to racism and bigotry in this country, but we have successfully also met some of those challenges. And I think I encourage the people who are listening today, to go out and meet your Muslim neighbor. You'll realize that your taxi driver is a Muslim, your local grocery store cashier is a Muslim, and you won't even be too surprised to know your heart surgeon is Muslim.
Yeah.
And so if you don't trust Muslims and you fear them, don't go to the hospital, don't
Right.
take a bus ride, and don't even, don't have any more ice cream cones. I mean,
No.
the reality is Muslims have been entrenched in the part of the society. We have the same struggles as everybody else. We wake up every morning taking care of our families, taking care of our kids, taking care of our loved ones, and shoveling just like everybody else shovels snow. And our biggest concerns is what every Minnesotans thinks about, And right now there is an effort to polarize the United States, to push people up to the fringes, and that is extremely problematic. And terrorism has no religion, has never had any religion, and we cannot allow for terrorists to be those who decide how we act. We've always acted on principles. We've always acted on deep, and strong moral and religious-based principles, and we cannot allow those to shift when there is such a horrific attack or a terrorist attack, to use those to create that polarization.
Okay. So I want to ask you two things. First of all, I want to talk about who's dying in these terrorist attacks, because we heard we're filming at the end of March, and there was recently an attack in Belgium that's all over the news. Not that there weren't other attacks, Pakistan, but the Belgium one is in the news, and one of the things is that there were 2 Americans. So that just drives it to the top of the news. So who's dying in ISIS attacks, if they are ISIS? We can't really get into where ISIS comes from, but and then this horrible myth that Allah is going to reward suicide bombers. So is that grounded in the religion at all, the whole 72 virgin thing?
Okay, they are mixing the truth of Islam, which is the myth that people created.
Okay,
yes, in Islam we believe a jihad. So, but jihad does not mean to kill innocent people.
Clarify that.
This we have to, jihad has 2 meanings. Number 1, the word jihad linguistically means like juhd, or jahada, which means struggle. So the person is struggling. But in general, the concept of jihad in Islam is struggle for justice, struggle for freedom. And we right now trying to make clear things. All of us, someone can say you are jihadist, and we are. Why? Because we want to tell the truth. So we want American people listen what is truth and what's not truth, which is Islamophobia. So all struggle is in jihad.
Okay.
And then there's a concept of jihad that exists a long time, and it will exist. But that concept of jihad in Islam, you will never find attack of the others or innocent people or civilians.
Okay.
It means like self-defense is jihad, and those are that God will reward if they defend their religion, their land. So what's the problem someone defending his religion? What's the problem someone defending his land? What's the problem someone defending
their life?
Lives of the others even.
Right.
So all this, yes, there are reward, whether it's 72, even like it could be like more than that, because the Quran says the reward of God is countless, because God owns everything. So we don't want even a limit with that number.
Right.
But but that number is like attracting people to struggle for the justice, for the fairness, without politicizing. But today, to paint the concept of jihad, which is part of Islam, that some people want to, so we have like now 2 problems as a Muslims. One group that want to paint the war of jihad equal terrorism,
Right.
which is not true. And then there is other, whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims, wants to wipe out the originality of jihad or existence of jihad, which is originally, and it is now, and it will be a struggle for justice and for freedom. So now, if I say, like Palestinians are doing jihad to free their land, I'm not terrorist.
Right.
But some countries, even including the United States, they might see you terrorist because you are supporting the struggle of Palestinians, which is a true and legitimate struggle recognized by the whole world, by UN. But for political reason, Americans don't want that struggle to go that far.
Right.
So what I mean is, true jihad is a struggle for justice, for freedom, for right, and sometimes whatever America believes, it becomes part of jihad.
Right.
But the question is, if they're doing, is different when others are doing. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So, and then, but killing innocent people,
No.
committing suicide to kill the innocent people, civilians, all are not part of Islam.
Okay.
And it will never be, because the beginning of Islam, as I said, is to save others and peace, and to live in that type of the peace and harmony. So the final thing that I want to add, which is very important nowadays, is when we talk about jihad, you go back to the history of Somalia that we just talked. When Ethiopian invaded Somalia, so Somali scholars and all the people, they waged jihad against Ethiopia, because now they are not occupying only one piece that traditionally that they was part of Ethiopia by force, but now they entered inside of Somalia and they occupied the capital city of Somalia. So that was jihad, but people who participated later on were called terrorists. Why? Because Ethiopian forces and Ethiopian government is alliance with America. American government listens only that one ear with that source, instead of listening the other ear from us or from any other decent sources that can help them to share with them what's going on inside of Somalia. Until now, until today, Ethiopia, I mean, like American government or foreign policy of America is not favorite Somalia to get back and stand on their feet until now. But they take everything or every information from Ethiopia, which is hostile to Somalia and existent of Somalia. So jihad truly is not what it's painted. It's totally different.
So it's defense of land and life, and
Exactly.
and
Yes.
it's not this terrorist suicide bombing, and that's never consistent. So
No.
again, we have mistranslation of a concept, and it's not just it's not innocent. It might be ignorant. It might not, but it has consequence in terms of promoting Islamophobia, because it's incorrect, and then it builds this sort of prejudice, hatred, because you think that the religion itself has this violent, when in fact the religion at its root is peace.
Yes.
So.
Well, I think you hit on the point that we've noticed not only in Islamophobia but also in extremism. We noticed that terrorist organizations copy and paste verses of the Quran and from the holy texts to spin it for their agenda. And we've also noticed the same type of practice being used by Islamophobes, and it's the same thing, not providing the full truth, not providing the full picture, but taking cuts and pasting of holy text as a way to smear the faith and to dispel lies about the faith. And this tactic has been unfortunately very successful because of the fact that there's a great deal of ignorance. And that's why I challenge people who are watching today to meet a Muslim, talk to a Muslim, visit a mosque, pick up an actual book on Islam that doesn't have an Islamophobe name on it. Because Islam is not a religion that just came in the last few weeks. I mean, this is a religion that has coexisted and actually has a beautiful history of Islam leading the world in saving the knowledge and the technology and advancing the world. And today, you could go back into places where you can find, even when Muslims were ruling, that Islam actually allowed for people of other faith not only to exist, but to be ruled under their religious laws. And so I think it's right now the fear element of terrorism and what's been happening across globally has escalated to a point where people only are looking for information to really satisfy already a very negative, bigoted, racially viewed world, kind of to pretty much to build based on that type of closed-minded prejudice viewpoint of the world, which does not help us and does not get to the bottom of what's happening.
So now we have a trial that's going to be starting pretty soon for these young men who are supposedly being charged under our horribly vague and most likely unconstitutional domestic support for foreign terrorist organizations. You're also a lawyer, so I think you probably know how badly framed this particular law is. But we have these programs, countering violent extremism programs, that our viewers will be a little familiar with because Dave Bicking, who's a regular guest on this show, talks about countering violent extremism and the Strong Cities initiative. But I want to at least mention some of the issues with this program, because this, I think, is starting to institutionalize these already false beliefs that are part of Islamophobia, because then you're not talking about one-on-one hatred, you're talking about programs that are specifically designed to, they say they're about violent extremism, and yet they're only targeting Somali, well, maybe Muslim in general, but in Minnesota, it's the Somali community, and we have the pilot program here because of the size of our Somali community, and they're in the schools, and they make that false link between Somali youth, Muslim youth, and violent extremism, a false link. So
what I'll say is that, first of all, you know, the Muslim community, wherever you are, but here, especially in Minnesota, we are concerned about our youth, just like any other community, and we believe that any youth who's lost through gang or violence or even extremism, one is too many.
Right.
And so in Minnesota, and the Imam is part of it, we have nearly 60 plus organizations that have come together to really create an effort to address this issue. So I want to make sure Minnesotans are assured that as much as terrorism is a problem, and as much as we've heard of these cases of young people trying to leave, the community is on top of it. And one thing you won't hear, and most people don't talk about, is the successes we've had.
Of course.
We have had absolutely
just like you don't hear about the heart surgeons.
You know, we have had absolutely no recruitment to Al-Shabaab. And that credit has to go to the mothers, it has to go to the teachers, it has to go back to the community who have really stepped up to make an effort. And today we are dealing with another crisis, and I think we are making an effort. We're making it from a community standpoint, but we're also making it from individual and family standpoint. What the government has done is has completely disregarded these efforts and said, we're going to step in and do this for you. And what we've learned is that whenever something like that has happened, we've had two programs here in Minnesota where it was about social services, basketball. And the government had plans to surveil and to create lists. And so when you have that type of relationship eroded with these types of revealing information about programs, and now on top of that, we have a government that wants to address extremism. And you will know in the United States that violent extremism is actually been perpetuated by white supremacists at 96%. And we have a program that is only targeting the Muslim community, which again reinforces the Islamophobia narratives that already exist, that Muslims are a community of suspects, that Muslims are terrorists. And when you have the government engaging in Islamophobia, you really run the risk of really creating an unsafe environment for Muslims. Today, in my job, I see every single day in Minnesota, I see cases coming from our schools. And Muslim kids, especially Muslim young females, are being targeted by their fellow classmates. And they're not being called, you know, traditional racist remarks that would be offensive to anybody, but would be targeted about their faith, or they're being called terrorists.
Right.
And we believe that's because of the overhyped and the over magnification of this issue, which only affects a small percentage. We're not even talking about 0.0001% of the youth in Minnesota. and completely dismissing the other issues that are at the table. We have with the worst achievement gap in the United States for African Americans and typically Somali kids. We have the worst healthcare disparities. We have the worst economic disparities in the United States here for African Americans and typically Somali kids. We have many challenges that we have that are actually creating more problems for our youth today than actually young kids leaving for extremism. Not to say that that's an issue and that we should definitely address it and make it a priority, which we have, unfortunately not being addressed. So the Countering Violence Extremism program in the Twin Cities is currently creating a pathway of trying to address this issue from a social service standpoint, where we already see, with or without this program, we see those disparities should be an immediate pushback for an immediate call to action from foundations and the state and other departments, that when you see those numbers, you address them. And they're correlating this idea that obviously the Muslim youth are a community of suspects and they're trying to engage. I mean, just imagine if you are one of the programs or one of the ideas that has been presented, imagine creating an after-school or creating a staff that all they do is come into public schools and they literally sit there with maybe a pen and pencil looking at the kid and seeing if this kid has been radicalized based on their behavior, of if the kid is silent today or quiet today. And all experts who've actually studied this issue say there's no real pattern. We cannot predict it. There's no real clear pattern. But now we're going to create another level where we have teachers going around and monitoring kids while we already know, as I mentioned, they're not even teaching them. And so this is a huge concern for the Muslim community. And on May 1st of 2015, we actually set a press release which included nearly 90% of the Muslim organizations in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota who have come against this program. But didn't stop there, offered alternative, offered what we are already doing. Here's how you can work with our community. And so this is, as much as this is an important issue, I think, for many Minnesotans, I think they should be rest assured to know that this community is on top of it. But we are losing the battle, not with the community, we're losing the battle when our government is creating stigmatization for our community, is creating the problems and actually eroding long-lasting relationships with our law enforcement, where now our community fears potentially that they're being spied on. And we're learning every single day with near revealing informants who are speaking out against the FBI here in Minnesota.
And isn't it also true?
One thing that we need to clarify in this point is the name CVE, counter-violent extremism, or anti-terror programs, as they call it. Some people, when they see like there is a group against this, they misread. We are principally, because Islam is against all types of the violent. So we have to make it very clear. So we are countering all types of the violent extremism because it's not part of Islam. Islam, you can have opposite opinions, but you cannot use force to convey your opinion to the others.
And this is
so. But when people hear that, like as CAIR or our mosque is leading this effort against this, they think that this group themselves are promoting. So I want to make clear that it's nothing to do. What we are saying is the message, as Jaylani just said. We're saying that this is not appropriate program to tackle the issues. Who knows this? If there is a problem, always you go back the community of the problem.
Right.
We need our community from the base to discuss what we have as a problems, and then to come up our own solutions. Then the government can help to practicize that solution and to make it successful. But now that you have like a program came from the White House, never studied the conditions of our community and the need. And then as Jaylani said, we have done a lot. Like for example, I went to Somalia. I was a member of 160 Imams and scholars. Had a meeting for 5 days in Mogadishu, the capital city, discussing all types or for all forms of solutions to counter violent extremism, coming from the Quran, and from the prophetic tradition. And we issued fatwa that was spread out and used by that government. And the media came to me and explained about what has happened, about that meeting. And from Somalia to here, all our imams, the FBI never find any mosque that supported or recruited anyone to go to any other place or to join any violent groups. So when you have all this together, that shows like community already had done a lot of work. The rest we're supposed to discuss. If the government has any suggestions, by the way, the first, I have to praise this, Lugar first came to us, the imams, and I was the first one of Somali imams that he met.
Lugar being?
The U.S. attorney.
The U.S. attorney.
Okay.
And then when he came, I gave like the 4 important areas that we can work together to make successful his job. And but later on, he did not listen to us. Instead, his office, instead of helping us, the office started, before we were like united as imams, coming together, and he was sitting with us and discussing almost every month or every other month. But later on, when this program came, that he never consulted with us, that program divided the whole community until majority of the community, as Jaylani said, became one side that they say like, this does not belong to the community. We have to talk more, but he shut down the door.
Yeah, and I just want to say, so what you were saying, that being opposed to countering violent extremism, the program, doesn't mean you're supporting violent extremism.
No, we're against, yeah.
And then also in this program, I think the teachers who are being made into informants in the schools are actually watching for things that might indicate that students are really becoming more religious, like wearing religious garb, and as a sign that they are becoming terrorists.
We have an article that recently came out that talked about the U.S. military had a white paper document that said now wearing the headscarf or the hijab is a passive form of terrorism, which is, again, is starting to really follow this line, this pattern where we're not only accepting the Islamophobe narrative.
Exactly.
We're actually practicing as part of our efforts to address this issue. And this type of blanket is unconstitutional. Blanket surveillance and blanket guilt by association is not only unconstitutional, but it really feeds into the terrorists' plan to create fear amongst ourselves and to start to push the Muslim community to the margins. And what is that going to do other than to create more problems and even further fuel young people who are currently, who could potentially be listening to those messages?
So our hour has flown by. I feel like we could do another hour. Maybe we'll have to come back together.
Sure.
But I want to thank you, Imam and Jaylani, and thank you to Dave Garland, our director, and thank you so much for joining us for Our World Today.